Namaste. Namaste. And welcome. All right.
Is it happening? Okay, we're going live. Yeah. We're live. So good evening. I want to welcome everyone here tonight to Satri's last satsang here in Connecticut for 2019 or 2018. I jumped ahead. But to also welcome those of you who are watching us from somewhere else. Welcome. And thank you for joining us. I know some of you have been joining us for this entire time. So at this point, we'll turn over to Satri. But I'd like to welcome Amanda. She made it. Yay.
All the way from Toronto.
All the way from Toronto.
Okay.
I am from Toronto.
All right. Welcome, man.
And I see Catherine and I see Paul and Victine. There's lots of faces here. So anyway, thank you and welcome.
Okay. Well, some of you, it's been a while since I've seen. Some of you I haven't seen before. So welcome. And we are in the fourth day of a series of questions. And it is a kind of an unfolding, a revelation of how this, what we call this possibility for consciousness that we all carry, this potentiality. And the key thematic principle here is self-evident truths. That there are things that are already so, that we're separating ourselves from. And that the spiritual path is about learning how to change our relationship with existence so that these self-evident truths show themselves. So this was inspired by a conversation about the U.S. Constitution. That's where it came from, right? Self-evident truths. And the self-evident truth of the Constitution, which is really quite extraordinary in the history of man, is the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the Bill of Rights. And it's, I'm in a place in consciousness now where that actually was able to go through a political process and actually happen is astounding, especially in the world we live in now politically. And that there had to have been this opening in the collective consciousness to have allowed that one shining light to rise up back in the 1700s when the rest of the world was still in tribalism and war and dictatorship and all kings and queens and all the rest of it. So is and what they were speaking to is what I'm speaking to tonight, which is some inherent principles about the nature of existence and our relationship with it. That when they are seen and acknowledged, brought up into the light of our consciousness, become powerful organizing principles for how to live, how to be, how to make decisions, how to decide what's important and what's not important, what's real and what's not real, what to value and what not to value. It's something that begins to take us beyond the more primitive structures of religion, morality, rights and wrongs, because it speaks of an inherent potential that all of us earn by being self-aware human beings on this planet. We're all created equal, for example. We are all drawn from the same substance. That essential quality of what you are is the same as what I am, what Satchimai is, what all of you are. We come from that one substance, and we take it for granted. We're not paying attention because we're so distracted or burdened by our piece of the historical or evolutionary error of mankind. Actually, somebody last night said, why is it an error? And because they didn't have human beings at the start, despite what the Bible says, it had to be figured out. It took billions of years before there was something we could call a human being. So that nature, in its randomness of this or that duality, survival, not survival, success or not success, living or dead, reproduced or not. So the whole principle of the unfolding arose from something that was there before existence. That's my experience. That there was fundamental principles which was really the source of us all. And my realization when it happened in 1998 is where it was very clear to me at the moment of my awakening that there are principles that I did not know anything about that is actually shaping what we do, what we think, what we feel, how we think, how we feel. Our unfolding expression of our individuality is actually a reflection of an unfolding expression of something much greater. They're all bits and pieces of this endless diversity that is arising from a same common purpose, sets of principles. Discovering these for yourself has the possibility of transforming your life, to be able to live aligned with them. So we're on the fourth question. First question was, who am I? Second question, why am I here? And what is, therefore, the third question, what is the purpose for me to be, to exist, to be a who, to be a person? And now we're on the final question is, how do we live? In our ability to come to a relationship with these four questions, we end up, how do I live? What are the actions I take? How can I translate into this into something that I can make real in my day-to-day life? The first fundamental qualifier in order to truly be able to meet these four questions is your awakening. Unless we've been able to come out through a spiritual awakening event or process, that the quality of our consciousness is still too conditioned by our upbringing, by our programming, by the collective consciousness, that we have to have broken out enough and gotten a sense of that which is beyond what we've known ourselves to be previously. Once that happens, we begin to tap into a quality of being, a quality of knowing that allows for us to actually begin what would be essentially a revolutionary readjustment of what reality is for ourselves. So when my awakening happened in 1998, 20 years ago, I was a moderately successful human being, architect, family man, married to Satsang at that time for 13 years. She was a founder of a micro enterprise nonprofit in the state of Nevada, which proved to be very successful. It's still in existence now. But she worked in many different nonprofits. And me, I was an architect that had worked in large projects, but had pulled back from having my own business and was working out of my house in Nevada City. Washoe Valley, Nevada. And it was late one night after second shift. I had 2 shifts, 8 hours during the day and 8 hours in the evening. So I had 16 hours a day. That was my routine. And during the day, I did all my meeting people and going to job sites and all the rest of it. I also had a solar energy business, and I was a political activist for passing that metering law in the state of Nevada. So Satchmai was, both of us were very much kind of like in the community of people who were in activism or trying to bring good into our communities. I was president of the Washoe Valley Citizen Advisory Board, which governed an entire valley between Reno and Carson City for 5 years, involved in all kinds of problems and issues. So I had a full life. I loved to hike. I was there on the foothills of the Sierra Nevadas. Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail was one of my favorite pastimes, especially during the snow season. So when I was working that night, I had no idea of what was going to be possible. I had friends, Buddhist friends, who we would meditate with just before dinner. And it was just like social meditation, right? And I was not, it was pleasant, but it was not anything that was important to me. I had been exposed to matters of spirituality young, but I was not conscious of any awakening. I was not conscious that I was in any way different than any other human being. I still had desire and anger to some extent. I had worked on my own human psychology enough. I had been able to actualize things in myself out of my childhood and created a more positive and actually effective identity than the one I was programmed for. Got over addictions, got over rage issues, so on and so forth. I had learned a lot in my relationship with Satchmai. I had learned how I was as much responsible for my experience with her as she was, and that I had to start finding a new way to be, what I call coming to responsibility to my role in the relationship. And it was actually very powerful and useful for me in that process. So when my awakening came, there wasn't anything missing. There wasn't any, even as I look back now, any clear lack or need or aspiration or longing that I was aware of. I can see that without knowing it, that my life had been a process of challenges and limitations that I was able to move beyond incrementally over the course of my life. That allowed me to come to that point. There was a sense of kind of fulfillment or completion. I was perfectly happy to live the rest of my life just as I had it. There wasn't a sense that a worry about death. I was a happy agnostic. I didn't need God to exist or to live on the other side of death. Either way was fine with me. I wasn't aware of any undue anxiety or stress. That was actually a surprisingly unique time. In my mid-40s, the normal stress and self-doubt and anxiety in the world had fallen away without me even knowing that had happened. And I was actually enjoying life. So when that night came, it was heralded by this great despair. Happened out of the blue. Actually, it happened when I saw my brother who had come to see me drive down the driveway without saying goodbye, after having spent the weekend and not been able to talk to me at all because I was too busy. And in that moment, something got triggered in me about having missed an opportunity to express and experience love. I call it lost love. And this had been showing up in like the 5 years before my awakening, where I would have these moments of sorrow, grief that had no basis. Sometimes just out of the blue, or sometimes watching a movie or reading a book. It would just come in, and there would just be this deep sobbing, which didn't make any sense to me. But it was wonderful in its own way. So this, something that was a heralding of something that came. And when that event happened, what happened was this grief became something so much more intense than it had ever been before. And it went into a deep, deep anguish and despair that was like nothing I had any reference for. And I had some flashes of parts of my nature, my selfishness, my disregard of making things that were important to me the most important thing in my life, not being able to express or receive love. All of that became something much more. And the anguish got to the point where I was experiencing what I would call a quality of cruelty and selfishness that was so much exaggerated from anything I was conscious of in this life at that time anyway, that I went unconscious. And that's how I said it. It was like I was moving towards something that my consciousness didn't know how to be with, and all it was seeing was darkness. All it was seeing was the worst. All it was getting in touch with, and it wasn't like in my mind, it was as if in my whole body, that I was in a visceral process of coming into relationship with a harsh, impossible cruelty, darkness that was like completely inhuman. And when I came to from going out from that, I felt I had just won the lottery of all lotteries. I had popped out into what would be essentially the polar opposite. I felt connected to everything. I felt and experienced that what has happened was a showing of something that was already here, that I had not been able to access into that moment. That sense of the reality of it was the most distinct quality of it. I'll use the word real or reality as sort of pointing to a quality of being where everything that was me was stripped away and all there was existence. One way of languaging that. But I knew it was the most wonderful thing I had ever felt, ever experienced. I had no frame beyond splendor, beyond love, beyond any condition of knowingness or capacity for being that I could imagine. And when I was full of gratitude, full of overwhelming love, full of something had awakened. Something had come into existence in this form. And it wasn't me. It was something else. A principle of which my me-ness is an expression, but something more essential became revealed. So I went upstairs, shared it with Satsang. She was powerfully impacted. She had been sleeping. She sat right up in bed and had her comparable of what was happening. Tears started pouring down her face, and she said, "What is happening? What is happening?" So that was quite a shock too, because I had no idea these kinds of experience could be transmitted, that somebody else could pick up on them. I didn't have any exposure to what many of you have been exposed to for years and years and years. I had a short period of life associated with a spiritual teacher late in my teens and early 20s, but it had no languaging, no orientation or preparation for what had come. So that night when I sat on the edge of the bed, Satsang had gone back to sleep, and I was looking over the high desert in Nevada. I could see or feel or experience that it was all purposeful, that my whole life was purposeful, that everything that I had lived, everything that I had done led me to this moment. That life has a purpose. That anything that we have been able to orient ourselves to or live aligned with that has that quality of what we might call purposefulness draws from that same purpose. I also knew that the universe was intelligent and ordered, that it's not haphazard, that there are structures and beings and forces that are at work in manifesting this purpose. And that time, I didn't know what the purpose was, except that the fact is I was evidence of one aspect of that purpose was it had just woken up to itself in me. Okay. All right, so from that context comes the 4 questions. And why 4 questions? Because the nature of what happens to uncovering this purpose in our own lives is we have to step out of the habit of our superficial life. We have to take what has awakened to us, which is the beginning of awakening, in fact. Awakening is the start of a process by which we move into alignment with that principle that has been living us all along. First, there's this individual part where we need to go into a relationship with what has happened in our awakening. So the way I describe awakening is it's when the what wakes up from the who, where the entanglement of the quality of ourselves as a person and our embodiment as a human being, our stories, our ideas, our thoughts, our feelings, our ambitions, our programming is separate from a quality of beingness. Spirit and matter are intertwined. And that awakening is a moment where that in us, which is spirit, shifts its relationship in matter, comes out of the deep, convincing embedment with our identity as a separate human being and steps out of that to some extent. It may be a great extent or a partial extent, which opens us up to the field of existence that's permeating everything, that until that moment, we weren't able to experience or see. It was then this process of awakening is the introduction to the first step of the self-evident truth of what we are. But in order to make that real, we need to use a means by which we can break out of the habit that we woke up from, where that we have 2 roles in this. One is to empower that which woke up, and the second is to start dismantling that which is still asleep, to wake up that which is still asleep, to discover the parts of ourselves that are still vested in the sleep state, the state of not knowing the truth, the state of ignorance, the state that we've been living, the part that creates suffering, the part that creates separation, the part that can imagine it doesn't know love, that can imagine that it is separate from other people, the part that can be cruel, the part that can be fearful, the part that needs to control things to be a certain way, to survive, to succeed. So part of that process is what all spiritual teachings point to. Many people have awakened in history. In this time, in this era, many more people are awakening. But the problem with the awakening that's occurring in this era is that there are are not the same structures in place to give people a paradigm. So when people awoke before, it would be to Muhammad's teachings or to Christ's teachings or to any of the religious teachings, or primitive times to the sun god or the wind god or the shambalistic traditions. They awake up to this quality that's somewhere between awakened and not awakened, somewhere in between, where the quality of consciousness has woken up but is not freed itself. Or if it freed itself, it doesn't know how to operate from this place in such a way that this place, the who, can change, the who can become transformed. So we are in an age where there's many, many awakenings going on, but despite how much popular and widespread spirituality is, there's still many people who are awakening and don't know that's what's happening to them. All the time I meet people who have been traumatized by their awakening. They are convinced that something was seriously wrong, or someone around them is convinced that something was seriously wrong. And the greater the awakening, the more convincing it is that something is wrong. So people get afraid of the changes in the person because they're beginning to break out of the weave of their lives in that moment of awakening, and it can create quite a great disturbance on those who are connected to or are connected to us. So there's been a lot of misunderstandings about awakening, and there are misunderstandings on what is the purpose of awakening. As a matter of fact, for most people, when the awakening comes, your purpose is to stay awake. And in fact, that is a very useful first step, to stay awake, to stay in that state, and to use whatever technology, teachers, teachings, whatever that can allow you to stay awake. Because you can't do anything if you fall back to sleep, because then there's no one to make any distinction. There's no one to discriminate. You become your old self. And inevitably, unless you do find a spiritual practice, until you're intelligent, your ego's intelligence can learn to collaborate with the process, or your ego's heart can align itself because of the opening that's occurred in the heart when the awakening happened. Because there's two kinds: an awakening in your awareness, which is your intelligence, or awakening in the heart, where you feel connected to everything. So unless you can keep that going, the tendency is the old habits will veil you and eventually reduce your ability to access your awakening, inevitably. So those of you in this room have gone through that process for yourself. And you're either in various stages of the full expression of that awakened state compared to other times in your life. And what that is and what that looks like and what can you do to align with the awakening that you have had is where these 4 questions become useful. So the first question that we explored in Boston is this: who am I? Because that's the fundamental question. If you can't get to that answer in a meaningful way, the other questions will not be particularly relevant. They'll be a philosophical exercise. So what is it that we are? What is the fundamental principle? And what does that mean for us? So what is it we awaken to? Well, it's the same thing that allows you to be in this room aware of your own existence. It's the same principle of self-awareness that can know it exists. So it answers a fundamental principle, a fundamental self-evident truth, which we all have, that needs no validation from anyone else, and that is, I exist. I exist. I am. Without the story, without the personality, without the history, without your mood, without what happened today just before you got here, what will happen tonight or tomorrow, just now, right here, you're existent. is the only self-evident truth you really need to know to start this inquiry. I am. What we awake to is that, or what awakens is that I amness. The essential quality of our existence shifts vibrationally. It comes out of the deeper the more entangled and encumbered vibration of our personality and our story and our history and our habits and our conditioning and our upbringing, our resentments and our angers and our longings and our needs and our wishes, our judgments and our expectations. It comes out of that density and starts vibrating at a different frequency for some period of time. And from there, we can see that we awakened. We awakened out of that habitual structure of our day-to-day life and are now able to experience it from a different vantage point. When this comes, that basic self-evident truth becomes something that we can know in our own experience, know in our own knowing, recognize when we're there and recognize when we're not. Once this happens, discrimination can happen. We can catch ourselves being run by our negative story. We can watch ourselves take actions that we know aren't going to work. We can watch ourselves repeating patterns in our relationships that we had previously never known we had any control over because we were lost in them when they were arising. But now we can actually see them coming up. We can feel them rising up in us. We discover we have choice about how we act. We discover that we can decide to follow the impulse or the reaction or not. Something of that I amness carries an inherent authority, an inherent intelligence, an inherent capacity that allows ourselves to think, act, feel, behave in ways that were previously not possible. But we have to use that. We have to bring that into our life. We have to choose to recognize that this is causing me suffering or causing suffering for those I care about. And we have to choose to stop taking those actions, stop feeding those negative stories, stop allowing ourselves to get overtaken by our addictions or our needs or compulsions. This then is where we take that quality that we've awakened to and give it a place in our lives. It's the essential quality of us that actually is the captain of our own ship, but has forgotten that it has a rudder, has forgotten to keep its hand on the rudder, has been allowing the waves and the currents to take you this way and that way. So part of awakening is you come into your own power. You come into this quality of intelligence and authority that has say over what you didn't have say over before. So then the question that comes up is the second question, which is, why in the hell am I here? Yes, I'm discovering I've been embedded in this pattern of behaving. I've been acting out the patterns from my parents. I am an acting out of my father or my mother, or the rebellion against those, or the unwitting compliance with who they were. And I'm becoming an instrument just like they were an instrument of the same error they inherited from their parents and their parents and their parents. That we all have inherited this stream of the consequences that have come from the experimentation that nature had to go through for 4.5 billion years to create bodies, physical meat bodies, sufficiently complex and sophisticated to hold consciousness so that it could wake up in itself. The evolutionary purpose of nature was to create vehicles for consciousness so that an inherent purpose, which we'll talk about in the third question, could manifest itself. And that in that inherent purpose is this quality of consciousness that wishes to wake up, that longs to wake up, that longs to become self-aware. And the human body is the first waking up out of our animal ancestry, no longer run by instinct, no, in the same way, no longer run by primitive motives where instead of hardwired, we have software. The human being has hardware, but it also has software. Animal life has hardware mostly, and a little bit of software. So we are software dominant. Our central operating system resides in the brain and nervous system. It is, and that is infinitely possible to program, just like a computer operating system can be programmed in many, many different ways. So does the human system carries this huge potential that we're only tapping a tiny fraction of because of our programming and conditioning and upbringing and choices. exquisite capacity for enjoyment. You can be conscious when you're self-aware. You can be conscious not only of when you're in pain, but you can be conscious when you're in pleasure. Now, the nature of physical pleasure are tiny little. Why we ingest it, take this little sensory experience and expand it into great reference places and domains and comparisons, both in our own experience and in our mind, the context, the setting, the lighting, whatever it is the person we're with, all of which can take this to a new level. So this is the extraordinary potential we carry in the body. But what we do with it is keep enhancing our physical embodiment towards the negative or the positive, towards suffering or happiness. And the part of ourselves that knows it's in existence and seeks to know itself in existence can create an identity based on either of these principles, suffering or happiness. So without knowing it, we tend to reinforce one or the other in terms of who I am. I am the one who's not good enough. I'm the one that nobody loves. I'm the one that doesn't know how to be like other people. Or I'm the one who is never finding any satisfaction in the world. I'm never getting what I want. Whatever be the story. Or I'm the one that's so successful. I'm the one who's always happy. I'm the one that nobody else can understand. I'm the only one who can see the truth. No one else can see the truth, although perhaps those in this room don't suffer from that, but in your own way you do. Those who, from your lofty tower of judgment, are racking harsh ruin on all those you judge, including yourself, using your infinite power to make others less or to enhance others. Whatever be the strategy of the error of our personalities. And of course, what does this do? It distracts us from our ability to move into a deeper relationship with existence than the one that we have been programmed with and are unwittingly supporting every single day through our thoughts, through our behavior, through our moods and our feelings, without knowing we're doing that. And in the process, looking to who to blame for when it doesn't go our way, or who to shame when it doesn't go our way. So we're unwittingly instruments of the error, losing that inherent potential within ourselves that comes with being self-aware, and especially when we awaken. Because that gives us a gift, a point by which we can begin to understand right relationship with who we are, but also a right relationship with why you're here. This moving into right relationship is discovering the deeper principles that are below this superficial adaptation that we've made real. Even after the awakening of the spiritual path, you still got your favorite restaurant. You still got your favorite dishes. You still got people you like and you don't like. You still shape your life based on your comfort and your preferences and your pleasures and your habits and your routines and your familiarities and your securities and your needs and what you've been able to know in the past. Most even awakened human beings don't know how to step out of the street light of what you've experienced up until now. You take that awakening and you bounce around within the perimeter of what you've known previously, rather than venture out and begin to experiment with the possibilities of what has come to you. So this is the habitual part that's organized in matter, that tries to keep things stable, tries to keep things intact enough so that the purpose of life can be fulfilled, a species being consistent generation after generation enough, so that the species could develop and refine whatever unique characteristic it brings into existence. So we all carry that inherent momentum of the programming of nature that keeps us with a certain boundary of what's possible. So this question of why am I here really begins to take on some power when we learn to start experimenting with our lives. When we begin to learn to find a way to shift our relationship with existence. And when we do that, when we expand out, every time we make a choice to come out of our old habit, there's this sense of becoming a little more awake, a little more true, a little more in relationship with existence than we were before. When you can catch when you can discover that you have some mastery in one part of your life, some ability that you didn't have before. You take up exercise, you go on to a regime of modest, controlled conscious eating. You begin to recover something of the possibility you are by managing the part of yourself that otherwise would keep you in the superficial, otherwise keep you distracted, otherwise prevent you from going deep into the possibility of being a human being. Instead of living to eat, you eat to live. So it becomes a shift in the principle. This begins to point to the fact that you're waking up to why you're here. The other thing you wake up to is there nobody else is responsible for your life but you. You are actually the source of your problem, and you are the source of your happiness. You're the one who can determine the direction, not other people, unless you unwittingly have given your power away to others in a way that doesn't support you coming out of yourself. But of course, we can give our power away to others. That can help us come out of ourselves too. So the idea of beginning to recognize that we're choosing who are our guides. We're choosing what we've made important. We're choosing to act on certain values or certain principles, and those principles or those values true to what you are trying to uncover in that inherent potential you are as an I amness. And how do you know? Because every time you take a step that takes you out of the boundary of what you've known before, every time you take a step where you search something of that personal responsibility into your life, more lightness comes to you, more access to that principle of the possibility of life becomes available. It's like there's more air in your lungs. There's more strength in your muscles. There's more capacity to step into a situation and not be defeated or overtaken. It is this evidence in your own experience when we begin to live aligned with that basic fundamental truth that I am the one, whoever or whatever reasons I'm here, I am the one that determines what to do from now. I am the one that has the possibility. No one else will do it for me unless I empower them to do it. And I have to always watch the part of me that doesn't want to take responsibility for my own life and would rather others do it for us. So we retreat into some sort of quasi-asleep compromise where we keep ourselves anesthetized from having to face the possibility of future suffering, of future loss, or future diminishment that would occur if we let someone else steer our boat. Okay. The third question had to do with the purpose of life. So why am I here is the second question. The third question is, what is the purpose of life? Now there's a transition here. The first two questions as who am I and why am I here have to do with you as an individual. It has to do with a process of unfolding the potential that you inherently carry. Waking up to that self-evident reality of what and who you are. You have to meet the who and the what. And the more what, the more you can know the who. And the more you can know the who, the more full can the what be embodied. So there is this relationship with spirit and matter where one helps enhance the other. What sets this off can be any numbers of things that may be involved in the awakening process, but it's still your individual process. The next question is what got revealed to me with my awakening? And that was, what is the purpose of life? Now, at that night, when that happened, the fourth question. Nope, the third question. What is the purpose of life? When it came to me at the time of my awakening, it was shown. I didn't know what it was shown. It took me a period of about 6 years when I went to India and was exposed to the Bhagavad Gita and was exposed to a teacher who had come to the fullness of the realization that had started with me in India. Sri Atmananda was my teacher, who used the Bhagavad Gita to describe a map of the awakening process of consciousness. And it became apparent because it was happening with me spontaneously. It was unfolding continuously. Certainly my awakening was different than others in that once it started, it didn't stop, and that it has lived me ever since. So there was something about me that occurred at that stage where I made this transition that immediately showed me something greater than myself. Not only did I wake out of myself, I also woke up to that which was the premise on which I awakened from. That premise of existence that allowed for that awakening to happen. Because though I knew I didn't do it, I knew that it was a reflection of principles that governed existence. I knew that it was a revealing of an inherent principle within me, but it wasn't about me. It was an inherent principle within all of us. And that my life had been a unwitting maturation of a process that allowed that to happen. That my human being came out of the tight bud of my ego, came out and opened up in the flowering of the possibility of myself as an individual, as an expression of a universal principle that lives all of us. So this third question is quite fundamental in my relationship with people because it begins to open up the possibility that who we are is very much secondary to what we are. That we're all individual expressions of a universal principle. When that happens, we open ourselves up to forces that are beyond those that are available to us through our own individuality, to whatever energy, strength, or knowingness that's available to us through our own individual evolution expands when we begin to address our relationship with the purpose of life. So for me, the recognition of the purpose of life was that there was a principle, which I call the Sat, that existed prior to existence. In the Hindus, they call the tradition, or Vedic tradition, is called the Absolute. The Absolute is that which has no existence, but upon its base existence comes into existence. So it's a paradoxical quality of consciousness where consciousness is not yet in existence, but carries the potentiality of being in existence. And that is out of that potentiality arises this urge to exist, this will to be, this longing to experience, to know, to grow, to evolve, to learn, to express, to create, to expand, are all arising from this inherent principle I call the Sat, or the Absolute. And that all of nature is an expression of this unfolding purpose, this evolutionary movement. And as I said before, evolution, nature has taken this as far as she can. And now each of us, self-aware human beings, are the means by which this original purpose can manifest itself further. We have actually now, in fact, have the responsibility of mothering or husbanding in the next stage of the possibility of evolution of consciousness. Now, we can't come to even grasping that if we're still hooked up into our individual identity. We can't make that real or useful for us because we still look worried about our survival or being liked or not feeling bad or having what we want, because we're still distracted, limited by that self-absorption. But when we open to this, a possibility, an extraordinary new possibility comes forward with us. We can feel, like I felt in my awakening moment, that I'm part of something greater, something that's been here all along, something that's intelligent and purposeful and has this tremendous intelligence, but in tremendous strength and potential and power to bring about true change or transformation in the existing paradigm I was born into, or we were born into. There was this sense of awe and wonder at the possibility that was shown at that moment. If you look into your awakening, or if you look to experience that you've had in your life, spiritual experience you've had in your life, it carries within it this sense of awe, this sense of grasping a possibility that is still a potential. The sense of possibility is an expression of an inherent potential. But when we actually are on the verge of that potential becoming a possibility, there's this acceleration in us. It's like you get a new car, or you build a house, or you create a piece of work. You're starting to actualize something into the creation, and there's this sense of being tying into some greater enthusiasm, some greater interest, some greater passion than what would normally be available to you. So those are hints, indications that we are aligning ourselves with a purpose larger than our own, of which our lives had been individual expressions of, but now carry this possibility for expressing a whole new purpose, or a whole expanded version of that inherent purpose. In this point, at that stage, in this stage of the questioning, you begin to start tapping into universal forces. Forces that are here for the purpose of assisting each of us individually to awaken to that full potential we all carry. And it's not personal. It's greater than us. It's so that we can serve the world on a whole new level than what was available to us before. And that brings us to tonight's question, which is, how do I live? How do I live is where the tire meets the road. How do I live is the evidence of the alignment of the unaligned parts of yourself. It's the evidence of the degree of cooperation between your awakened self and your unawakened self. It is the proof of the pudding. It's when you come to responsibility as something you weren't able to be responsive to in the past. When you come out of the habit of you, the sleep or the fuzziness of you, and you come forward with some authority and some clarity in every moment of the unfolding of life. So how do you live? And that is actually the place where we begin to actualize consciously in a collaborative way for ourselves initially, but then for those who are connected to us, for the unresolved issues that still are limiting and binding what's possible for us individually, and those that we are in connection to, and then for those who start coming to us, or for the world. And there's this whole process by which we come out of this self-involved life and begin to find ourselves to be channels or instruments, not as an idea, but actually a direct experience of something greater living us, something greater speaking through us, something greater that's seeing and knowing and recognizing what is the self-evident truth of what is trying to come into existence. We become an instrument of awakening. We become an instrument of truth. We become an instrument of that quality of self-awareness, of the what we are, the principle, that inherent principle of I amness coming into existence. Each of us differently, each in our own unique way. You can't know in advance. The universe takes it over. So I can share something of what this was for me. Part of the characteristic of my journey was that I started my journey with a fair degree of recognition that I was personally responsible for my suffering and also, to some extent, for my happiness, and that I had learned to organize my life aligned with that. So I had a certain degree of functional effectiveness. So when the awakening happened, I took that capacity, that little capacity, and I left my life behind. I began by dismantling everything in my life that no longer served, that were part of the old life. I got rid of my tools and my clothing and my books and my possessions. I handed the house over to Satsang. I had sold the cars. I sold everything that was a limiter, any remnant, ballast that I had kept along around me for security or for confidence or enhancing my sense of self. And I packaged up all that I wasn't ready to give away to boxes. I still had a lot of stuff when I left for India. But when I walked on the airplane, I was as free as I could be from my past. It took me 9 months. I had to give away many projects. I had to step down from boards. I had to address many, many complicated issues in my life. We had to consolidate our finances. Satsang needed help so that she could have enough income to cover the cost of the house. So we took a loan and renovated, made an apartment. So we did things that would allow, all this was in motion when I left for India. So when I went to India, which by the way, was the other side of the world, about as far away as I could get on this planet from me. All right. So I had basically cut the cords, and I'll say inwardly, as far as I was able to recognize at that point, every time I cut a cord, that possibility kept expanding in me. There was so much enthusiasm for getting rid of me, for dismantling what it was that I was. There was like I had a purpose in life, which was aligned with the purpose of my awakening. And it was a felt, real experience of doing that. I'm 50 years old. I had gone through that impulsiveness when I was young, where I left everything, went over here, and left everything, went over there. So I had actually developed a very complicated life. So when I applied my intelligent effort to end it, it was so extraordinary. For example, architectural projects, I would always fuss with the design. Whatever design I came up with, I questioned it. I had to change it again. Then I'd look at it again, I'd have to change it again. After the awakening, first thing I came up with was perfect. There was no hesitation, there was no doubt. And that became drawings and went into the project and got done in a half the time, third of the time of what it normally took me to bring a project together. I was operating in the world so effectively because I was no longer attached to any outcome. I was no longer vested in it going a certain way because that paradigm was no longer relevant for me. All I wanted was more and more of this connection that was growing and growing in me. So when I came to India, there was just this space, this potential to take what had come and let it fully expand. And that's what it did. It kept expanding. Now, it was all happening naturally. So it was like the bud unfolding. But simultaneously, I was with a gardener. Simultaneously, I was with someone who is giving me a structure that my intellect could follow, which worked like a scaffolding, so that what was coming could begin to grow along certain avenues that it wouldn't have before. The great thing about the Hindu tradition, about the Vedas, is that they kept alive over these last 3,500 years the structure of spiritual unfolding through their technology, through their mantras, through their teachings, to the transmission from one being who is relatively realized to another being, so that it could be kept alive. So the Bhagavad Gita was one of the reflections of that, and it became a powerful structure that allowed me to collaborate each day, each 24-hour day that I lived in India with nothing to do. Okay, now I was a guy who worked 16 hours a day, and that felt right. So one of the great discoveries in India was learning how to stop. I used to say learning how to sit. It was the most painful thing in India, because my teacher was relatively primitive in the early days. The only thing you had to sit on was a straw mat on a concrete poured slab or dirt. So tremendous pain for my Western body over the years, learning to sit often for hours at a time. One of the things my teacher did initially was take me to these different temples to expose me to these different energy forces that each of these temples tap into. And we would go there and we would sit for 6 hours in a suffocatingly hot, humid, sweltering environment where the incense, clouds of incense, are choking you, and they're rattling away in this endless monotony of sounds and gruntal noises and primitive sounds. And you're sitting in a great deal of pain, and they are insulted if you move. You offend them if you move. So it was an extraordinary opportunity physically to be in an environment that hot, that humid, in a building, in a little room that had only screens on the windows, in temperature that would get to 120 degrees regularly, where there would be the only thing that could keep me alive was a fan that would go out when it got so hot that the power couldn't keep up. So there was no fan. And all you did is sit there in a puddle of sweat, waiting for any hint of a breeze. Sometimes I would just imagine a breeze. The organizing principles of my life had fallen away. I was simply in this complete new reordering of what it was that I had been, to become something that I was not quite yet. And if you look at the nature of the spiritual path of people who are with me, that's pretty much what all of them are going through. There's this gap between what we have been and what we are becoming. Crossing that gap is where you need to be able to have answered these questions sufficiently for yourself. Because no way, no matter how much love or clarity or structure is available to you, you are still crossing that chasm between the safety and the familiarity of what you've known yourself to be to that which is not yet known. What allows us to cross that chasm isn't us. Rather, it's this alignment between who we are with the arc of what we are that can have us cross the chasm. So one way I like to describe this, and one way to describe purpose, is Dharma. So the first question, the second question, which has to be, why am I here, is a question of individual Dharma. Individual Dharma has something to do with the impressions and the samskaras we brought with us this life, into this life, or picked up in this life. Either way you want to look at it, it's usually both, and or manifested in this life in order to try to resolve the error, to resolve the problem, to try to make things better. Actually, the inherent urge of coming into any one life is to get a better version of us. in this life, to try to do better this time. And, version number 2637.2, where we are in this process of trying to come into relationship in a way so resolution can happen, not knowing that it's resolution we're looking for. So we have a samskaric urge. The push of any one life is determined by those motives and drives and impressions. And that has an arc. Many people, if we're able to live aligned with that arc, we can then complete our lives in that particular piece of the samskaras we're trying to work out and be able to next life evolve further. But more often than not, maybe much more often than not, we lose track of our dharma and we lose the ability to come to resolution and unwittingly then perpetuate, add more baggage to our effort to try to resolve the issue. Because that's what we try to resolve the issue in ignorance. You try to resolve the issue by doing the same thing again and again. The next guy, the next job, the next move, the next new situation, the next new understanding, actually ending up to just perpetuate unwittingly what you've brought with you all along. The unawakened human being is doomed to come back, to try to resolve the unresolvable because we unwittingly add to the quantum of the samskaras. But when we awaken, or when we become mature through the many, 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 many lifetimes, Hindus say 100,000 lifetimes, these samskaras don't hold us as much. And we have opportunities to step out of the old structure and discover some of these self-evident truths and are able to resolve more of the karma than we create and actually open up the possibility of having a life where it's not just about our own individual dharma, where we become aligned in some way with the overarching dharma of the time we were born, of the era we were born into. So what is my experience is when people are in a stage where they're able to resolve their dharma enough for awakening to happen, then there's an opportunity at that point in the arc of their life to hitch on to the dharma that comes for the purpose of life and not only our purpose, to the dharma of life and not just our dharma. So this leaping from one structure of being, doing, and manifesting to another, that gap, we're the ones, this is the one we cross. This is where the tire meets the road. This is where we align ourselves successfully or not. It also is a point where all the true awakened teachers reside, where a soul comes, where their dharma is now lightened enough, complete enough, that there's a possibility for that individual expression of the divinity to leap into this place where they could possibly be of service to the world. And this is where my work resides. My work, the body of teachings, the clarity that I bring is because for whatever reason, the universe showed me the whole story, has given me the ability to communicate it in clarity and to guide people individually in sometimes very specific ways so that they can make this leap from living for their own individual expression to that which serves the world. So in the process of answering any one of these questions, we begin to answer the other questions. By the time you come to the fourth stage, the fourth question, your ability to know yourself, your ability to know why you're here, your ability to recognize the purpose of life is greatly enhanced. So each helps the other. The more you're more aware of yourself, the more you know why you're here, the more you can know the purpose of life and the more you can align with it. The more you can know the purpose of your own life, the more you unwittingly, like myself, can align yourself to knowing who you are in truth and to recognize the purpose of life and move into alignment with it. So each supports the other. These four stages are in the Bhagavad Gita. There are the first stages where we effort to come out of our little self, where we learn to apply the necessary practices and reminders that keep us in touch with our awakened self so we can continue to dismantle the error of our conditioned self. And in that process, begin to learn to live aligned with the purpose of life by serving, by sacrificing, by trying to understand universal principles, by being able to purify our perceiving so that we can begin to see the inherent truths, the self-evident truths of what we are and what life is and what is arising in fact in every single moment. I know, as my direct experience, that every person that's coming to me is living with an inherent potential and purpose, even if they don't know. I can see what it is that got you in this room. I can see the struggle that you had to go through to be here where this conversation could occur. I can see or sense what is your major obstacle or resistance, your unexamined parts, so that I can recognize each of you are in their own unfolding of a potential. But you may not know I see that. Even though I'm telling you this, it's not, these are just words. If you can't sense that possibility within yourself. When you're in touch with the possibility within yourself, it's like a yes. It just says yes. It's a recognition. This is true. This is real. This quality of recognition isn't necessarily in your mind, but there might be that. But there is just this gripping quality, awe. Yeah, that, whatever that is. Recognition is what is the way we begin to know everything I'm speaking of. Initially, we know something we don't yet know through an unfolding process. Recognition is the first thing. Something in us recognizes it within ourselves that we didn't know we had, that allows us to sense the truth of something. The next stage is revelation. That which we recognize, if we keep our attention on that, begins to reveal its nature. Oh, I see. It's about letting go. Oh, I see. It's about the things I understood before, about choosing forgiveness rather than resentment. I can see it's these things. These are the things that bring me into the awe, bring me into the relationship with existence that I long for. You begin to feel the longing, because that's how the expression of the purpose, when it starts showing itself, is longing or aspiration. We start longing for more of what has shown itself. We start aspiring for more of that which has revealed itself. So there's this revealing, recognizing, revealing, and then ultimately realizing. Realizing is when the who gets it. Recognizing or revealing comes through the what. But realizing is when the who comes on board. Is when the person of us says, yes, this is what I want. Yes, this is more important than anything else that's coming up for me. Yes, this is what I wake up for. This is what I live for. That realizing is what allows us to make it real. The more we act aligned with what we recognize, with what has been revealed to us, the more real it becomes. Okay, there you have it. There's the whole thing. All right, so what we do at this stage is we open up to the room. How are we doing for time? We got half an hour, 20 minutes. So it's your opportunity to ask any questions or bring forward what's there for you that you wish to share, or just to come up and make a leap into the unknown. just to come up and put your foot in your mouth on purpose. Just to go ahead and have the freedom to explore what you don't yet know. Step out of the field of the boundary of what's safe or comfortable or familiar. This is my job. Part of it's coach. What does a coach do? It pushes. It's give you an opportunity to leap. Now, I assure you that what leaps in you isn't you. So if you're trying to figure this out, give up. All right. Come, Angela.
I came up because Anita pointed to me to do so. So I thought, okay, I'll take it as a sign. I think
All right. Go ahead.
What stands out for me is the connection piece. I feel like I'm having an experience of that in a way that I have not before.
Describe that.
It actually has been showing up as like laughter, actually. I think we've talked about the second and third chakra. And so more of the pleasure and enjoyment is coming up.
Yes, yes.
And although I might have said it before, like, oh, I want to connect, or, I don't, the alternative, I don't really connect with people. I'm just feel like I'm having an experience actually of what connection is in a way that's new for me.
All right. So what you're tapping into is a self-existent quality of being. Because existence is the light. To be conscious in existence is a self-existent delight, because in that moment, you're actually fulfilling the purpose of existence. You're actually fulfilling your purpose and the purpose of existence. In the moment of enjoyment that has no outer source, in that enjoyment that is self-existent, bubbling up. Now you can label it love, you can label it freedom, you can label it aliveness, you can label it pleasure, you can label it excitement, joy. Any of these can be awe, wonder. Any of these can be expressions of the unfolding of that fulfillment. So, and what does that leave you with? Like a sense of possibility?
Yes, an expansion. And it does show up a lot in my work too, actually. I think that's where I first started to witness that, is that connection. Because I actually, like I had said before, I get to bring all of this into my work. I work with families actually, so who are in different phases of awakening, but they're going in they're working in conventional medicine, and so kids on medication. So it's quite expansive in any way as a role. And so it's very creative. So I'm grateful that I get to bring all of this there.
And it doesn't always happen where the dharma of our life can align for a period of time with the greater dharma. So that's what's happening. There's this permeation between what you do for your living or your relationships that you have and the unfolding of the purpose that you're here to serve.
Yeah, and it has been really for me in the rooting. So I'm like still living in the same place where I was born and raised, where I tried to run many times, but it was kind of like just this reeling me back, like trying to root. And so,
tell me about rooting. That's like something you've discovered.
Oh, yeah, I think most of my life I've been always trying to leave, get out, run as fast as I can, like with none of my belongings. Once I just walked out, I'm like, all right, I'm done. Right. And so many times it's like it's just this inner like knowing or that quality of being that's like, okay. That was a nice trip, wasn't it, Angela? Got to go back.
That's right. Well, this choosing where we are is rooting. To choose where we are.
And it was a choice for me. Yes. It had to be. I also recognized the choice.
Good.
That I could have kept running. Or I could have, but.
I'm sure this is the product of many lives of running.
Oh yeah. I think I could
so,
feel it in my body at some point,
yeah.
or my awareness, I would say. But
Yeah. No, the body knows truth
Yeah.
better than anything. It knows that there is something about being one place long enough so that the lessons that were coming for you to get, you're there to receive. The thing about staying in one place, because the way our unfolding of our samskaras is going to be through certain types of people, certain types of circumstances. And if we keep moving, the external world can't organize enough so that you can get the full lessons that you need. So when you take up consciously, instead of as a means of protection or avoidance, you consciously stay to meet what's arising, it can become a powerful opportunity to resolve those portions of your unmet karmas that would otherwise not be possible.
Yeah.
So,
and I do. So I'm not sure if it's just a thing I do, but recently, or there was also this feeling like before this week of like, sometimes I get to this neutral place, and my experience of me is that I would use that to stay small. So I'm just kind of watching that.
Right.
Right.
We go into default mode.
Yeah.
If we're not able to experience change, then the tendency is to lose track. But it's also part of the process. There's the process where you're pushing yourself into a new state of being, and then we come to a certain plateau, and then we're kind of it's happening. It's already happening, and we've gotten used to it happening. There's not the change. There's not the sense of difference. And so things are proceeding in a way that might feel like how we were before, but it's not. It's just a new parent. It's just you getting used to something that wasn't available before, and it's becoming your new normal. That's why I call it my new normal. Okay. And this happens in cycles.
Okay.
And why it happens in cycles has to do with our ability to integrate the new consciousness into the cells of our body. Because the body is the slowest one to catch on to the awakening experience. It takes years and years for the body to catch up to an awakened state. Sometimes it never does, because we don't know that that's what's necessary. So we have to take another life where we get a body that's more suitable for our next consciousness. So our ability to integrate is different. For some, they can integrate quickly. So then the progress is seemingly, they don't spend as much time in the neutral because they're able to take it to the next level quicker and quicker. For others, it's a longer period of time. At some point, you realize what is the process and can collaborate with it, so that instead of a awakening and a long period of integration and another awakening and a long period of integration, you can accelerate that process so that there's shiftings that are happening what you would call more radically. And this would be one of the roles a teacher would have with someone, is to assist them in the acceleration of the process that is naturally unfolding, in the same way that a gardener creates rows and prepares the soil and pulls the weeds and waters the plants, so that the plant, it's not as haphazard in the unfolding. Without a teacher, it is going to be more haphazard. And why it's haphazard? Because of the parts of you that still are asleep or obscured, that are not yet available for you to know. So the part of you that still wants something or hopes for something, still longs for something, or still doubts or is suspicious of something, these can get in the way of the full fruition of what awakening is.
And that I am very grateful for you in my life. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
For that.
It's hard to say who's happier, the plant or the farmer, but it always comes down to what I call love. In my experience, when truth, which is the essential reality of what we are, comes into existence, it's love. It is you're part of an interconnected reality that's tangibly available to you, and that every moment that in our connected reality becomes more tangible through this expression we call love or relationship. That we move into relationship in existence more immediately and more intimately than we ever could be possible when we were still vested in our individuality and our identity as a separate self. So the quality of immediacy as we develop and integrate and align ourselves is an unspeakable, endless, fulfilling, self-existent fulfillment of love. When this comes, there's just no fear. Nothing like fear. All there is varying degrees of the opportunity of unfolding the inherent possibility of what you are with another. And what's that like? Enjoyment. Enjoyment on steroids. It's like the flower that you see becomes this glorious expression of the divinity. And the flower somehow knows it's being seen as the glorious expression of divinity and shines more brightly. There becomes this relatedness that happens when this quality of consciousness becomes available to us, that we bring to all the lived life, the extraordinary capacity of the human body to experience sensation directly is actually an expression of the original purpose. Because why did that original Sat want to be in existence? So it could enjoy its own existence. So where we're in that state of enjoyment, without attachment, without need, without demand, without clinging, without control, without fear, that's enjoyment. That's the true enjoyment. It's not about flagellating yourself or being able to be so disciplined you can be a certain way forever. It's rather a freedom of being that's in the right balance between restraint and indulgence, right balance between activity and inactivity, between rest and waking, between doing and not doing, that the full possibility of being and thereby the purpose of existence can be expressed. So if you're feeling the joy of being, you are fulfilling the purpose of life. We just keep messing it up with our wanting to cherish it, save it, keep it, control it, have it keep happening. And the nature of enjoyment, by the way, from the state of the universal consciousness, includes those things that before we called awful, before that we didn't want to experience. It's the enjoyment of being alive isn't all one-sided, guys. It's both-sided. It's dark and light, diminishment and expansion. It is the unspeakable paradox of two opposing principles coexisting at the same time. I love you, hate you. Hate you, love you. I like you, don't like you. I don't like you, like you. I can't live without you, and I can't live with you. You notice how this all shows up in human relationships anyway, but we try to put them over here. We try to just have this one and not this one, but that sets us up for the teeter-totter. Because then we're denying one part of the enjoyment for another part, and the other part becomes deprived. Eventually, this gets too big and it pushes the other part back up. The only solution is when we take them both to the fulcrum of the teeter-totter, where we can be in both simultaneously. From here, this place is the true enjoyment. It's where we're on the edge of not existing and on the edge of existence. That is the final realization. Truth and untruth. Existing, not existing. In that principle, in that paradox, lives this extraordinary aliveness and immediacy and possibility within ourselves. not got in the way of the time we had for anybody else to come forward. So, anybody else want to come forward? Come, right? New. No, go ahead. Come forward. You're first. I had it. You have more timidity. I wanted you to come forward. Yeah, and say your name.
I'm Kathleen. And I'm looking for assistance. My mode of operation for my whole life has been being small and working one-on-one. I worked in healthcare and enjoyed the one-on-one experience very much. And it nourished me.
Okay.
I've worked for a long time, especially the past 10 years, on opening my heart and seeing also the choices that can be made in terms of one's thoughts and thus one's responses.
Actions, yeah.
Actions. Something has changed in my situation. My father died and left.
How long ago?
February.
February, very recent.
And left a large foundation to be managed.
By you?
And my two siblings.
And two siblings.
And we have very little experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The curse of inheritance. I like to say this. It can be a curse or a blessing, you know.
I have the opportunity to help a lot of people in situations, but I'm used to feeling nourished.
With just one drop at a time, not the whole
one-on-one.
ocean. Yes.
There's a distance when you're trying to deal with a lot of people and trying to help people by using systems, computers, and financial systems.
It's not relational in the normal way. It doesn't have that intimacy, that connection.
So I'm needing to learn how to open myself potentially larger so I can really feel the connection. So then I could make decisions that I feel would be clear.
Oh boy, really tricky stuff. A lot of karma in this domain. A lot of consequences in the collective consciousness. So I wouldn't wish this on you, but it looks like the universe said this is what definitely needed to make the shift. So I didn't have to kick you, the universe kicked you. All right. So now there is a possibility of coming to a true relationship, because this, you need to be clear, because of the content associated with money and money power, that it has been misused forever, and it's distorted not only our culture, the culture of many parts of the country, which is of the world, that has taken people out of relationship with each other. And there is no longer the ability for authentic connection because of the differences that money power makes. We're talking about an inequality in the economics of the world right now, but it's an inequality because it's artificially making some people superior to other people. And that material power that money brings is distorting the expression of the purpose to come into existence.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So Kathleen, is it a family foundation or private foundation?
Family.
So it's family. And are the parameters pretty specific about what you can give the money to and what you can't?
It's broad, very broad, except to 501c.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Because This is my old hunting grounds.
Gee,
No, I'm just curious. So it's broad. Oh,
yeah, it makes it harder
sorry.
to know you're doing the right.
It's broad. And
Okay,
each
well-
of the people involved, my siblings, myself, very, very different. Very different
And
approaches
you have
to life.
you have to give a certain amount out every year. It's required. So at least that's a parameter.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think what's missing for me is it's like there's like this void or this gap between me and what I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to feel more connected to whatever sort of larger.
Are you the executor, or you're is
One of them.
You're one of the. So all three of you are executors.
And trustees.
Okay, and trustees. Okay, so are you the oldest, middle,
Oldest.
Okay, so the karma has come to you.
Mhm. Yes, I've avoided money my whole life. My whole life.
Yeah.
I hate it.
I got it. Yeah. So this is really. I mean, we would think it's a boon. No, because it's not your money, and it's ruled by the government, and it has to be done in a certain way. And you have these huge number of options for doing it, and any of which could misuse the money you wouldn't know, or you perhaps would only have to have faith in how that would work. So we tend to add significance, or significance gets added to us for having that role and responsibility. So that's a big one to dump in front of this room. But it does imply, it does imply that the universe is asking you through in this particular expression, to move into alignment with a larger purpose. Mm-hmm. And there is perhaps something in the developmental quality of you and your relationship with people that is going to give you a marker to recognize something that's true or not true. And the recognition is going to be in your body, not your mind. Mm-hmm. Now, how can you do with this? Well, if you're in a domain that's outside of your expertise, you need to bring someone in who has the expertise to advise or direct or do the research or assist in determining what that might be, and then to make calls from your side. You don't have to worry about your other siblings, but from your side, that's aligned with your ability to recognize the truth of what is being presented, the opportunity of what's being presented. So this is relatively new. You're still in the early stages. Have you had to have a distribution yet? Or do you have?
It's too soon.
Next year.
Well, we've been doing it in small amounts. This is in 2019. It's going to be like.
Yeah, it's going to be a full-time job if it's a big foundation. So there are many examples, I mean, out there when people have major foundations. You can research that for yourself.
Yeah, it's a huge learning curve. It's just not something that I was expecting to be doing at this point in my life. Although I kind of knew it was coming.
It's possible, right?
Now we're in reality, and it's a huge learning curve. I think there's a lot of karma here. There's some messiness with the money. Yeah. And so we've already begun to
put in some
clear it up.
Yeah, clear it up.
So I feel like even I'm doing things for my father in helping to clear some of his karma, as well as whatever karma I have associated with it.
One thing that comes to me, I remember Bhagavan saying something, not around this specific area, but first of all, be very clear on what the legal and financial obligations are. Take care of that, follow that to the letter, so that you're not taking on more karma.
Right.
So you've got a good attorney, I'm assuming. There should be an attorney somewhere else.
Yes.
Yes. You've got a good attorney. Just make sure the legal and the financial piece is absolutely clear. And then that leaves you the space then to work out what needs to be worked out.
All right.
So that you don't take on more.
It's interesting. All right. So, Kathleen, I don't know if there's anything more than that you stay focused on your own internal unfolding of the possibility and not try to get swept away in this possibility, because it's probably eventually just going to be a fairly grim, thankless task in which you'll never know if you actually helped.
Mm-hmm.
So in the Bhagavad Gita, they tell you have the right to the action, but not the fruit thereof. So therefore, all you have is the right to the action. And what Satchmayu said is work within the material world's boundaries of those actions. And then don't get woo-woo about this. Don't get magical. Don't start getting astrology readings. Follow your being, because your being's developed enough. Now, something will say yes and something will say no, or it will say maybe. It'll be one of those three. And the nature of all, that's all you have. You have the right to the action, but not the fruit thereof. Therefore, you, no way, can help solve your father's karma. No way. You have yet to finish your karma, which is linked also to your mother. So the whole structure that you have, it's not about making things better for a dead person. Their consequences they're carrying on already. But what it can be is it can be an opportunity for the remaining siblings. It can also be a danger for the remaining siblings. So it's a test. How to do that is, you can't know at first. You're just going to have to use the best intelligence, but don't lose connection to yourself. Don't get too caught up into it. Find a way to step back from unnecessary involvement in the structure and the operations of it, so that you can stay in your connection with yourself. See, there's no benefit for her. I mean, you probably don't have to work, right? Or are you going to choose to continue to work through time?
Well, I was going on to learn more alternative modalities like acupressure and, do more one-on-one work with people and hospice work and, those kinds of things. That's what I do with my time in Buddhist practice organization. So it's just all of a sudden, a week before my father died, he goes, "Oh my God, I've given my children jobs."
Yeah.
Well, actually,
your children a curse.
You don't need to. You can hire a person who will manage the whole thing. And then you just come in, you and your sisters come in to make the final decisions on where the money goes, but that person can do the work. And you do not have to. That's not a requirement for a family foundation. But the other thing too, and this has been my own experience, is that when you are making the gifts, you do that as an offering so that there's no attachment. So when you let go of that money to that organization, to that nonprofit you're giving to, or however you're giving it, you don't go with it.
You let it go.
You just let it go. And then they do whatever reporting they have to do to the person who's running the organization. But you let go. There's no strings attached.
No attachment.
Controlling the process or trying to make a certain kind of outcome. But do get, the whole thing about it is that it's a distraction. It is. And it's a big challenge. Just look what it did in the room. Because it's like it's one of those apparent blessings that are in fact curses. So, and of course, what are curses? They're actually blessings. So the thing is, how to convert this into a blessing is the work you have before you. And the secret of it will be this freedom from attachment, freedom of need to control, freedom to continue to expand in our own individual unfolding. This is actually a different arc. It's your father's arc. You have your own arc. Your father's arc is not your arc. The arc of the unfolding of the samskaras that motivated your father is not yours, but that's the bitch with inheritance. We get stuck with the ancestral arc and we get hooked into it, and we then unwittingly make that our new purpose rather than manifesting love and truth and immediacy as our purpose. All right, so from my point of view, I wouldn't wish this on you. The universe, however, gave it to you. Maybe those who listen or watching to this would get a hint of what it would mean. so that you can get over the part of you that thinks having money would solve your problems. You'll have to wait. Kathleen, is there anything else?
No,
Okay,
that's all. Thank you.
Okay.
It's a good example of being in it but not of it.
Well, that would be the same as the Gita. Being in the world but not of the world. It's this ability to be fulfilled with whatever you have with no need for anything more. So that's effective action. Actually, we are very efficient in acting when there's no longer a investment in the outcome or identification with the process or us laying claim as the doer. Those are the three principles that trap us into more karma. The Mother book, by the way, does talk about money power in the 4th chapter of the little book that Sri Aurobindo produces. And 5th chapter. No, it's the 4th. 4th. It is the 4th. 5th is how to be a true divine worker. Yeah. But good, you're in the vicinity. Only one chapter off. Okay.
Oh, that will shut up at night. But they're not going to lock the doors on us.
All right. So let's give it a chance for someone else. Come forward.
Somebody over here. Yeah.
And since I'm a guest of Radha, I want to at least honor that she insists that I came up here.
And your name?
Barbara.
Barbara.
And I'll first express gratitude. I was at the Crestone 8-day last October.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was really cool.
Really
I
cool.
can't believe that I sat for an hour and a half 3 times a day. It just blew my mind because I can't sit for 5 minutes. So it was great. And I want to express my gratitude. Little did I know.
Well, you said emotion.
Yes. So I came back and it was so refreshing. I needed a break anyway. So this was a great gift to self break. And extraordinary, so different from Connecticut. One of the images that I took home with me and stayed with me it's still with me. We'd walk from the meditation dining hall to the residency hall at night after the talk, and I'd look up and it was this extraordinary galaxy of infinite stars, which you don't see in Connecticut, right?
The self-evident truth hidden by our civilized consciousness.
It was so stunning. I mean, just
Stunning.
dazzling.
Yeah.
So I kept that image of great openness with me for a long time.
Oh, good one.
Yeah. Little did I know, though. So I went into a winter of really kind of isolation. I mean, I'm a good example of the gig economy because I have 4. If you count the Airbnb, that's 5. But I went into this sort of cocooning of very quiet, no social at all. I would just do what I need to do for my various, and cheerfully. I mean, with energy. It was not a depression or anything, but I guess I was doing a deep recharge.
Or an integration. You took in a very big amount of energy in a short period of time. Someone who has not on their own been able to meditate as long as you end up meditating in the 6th day or the 9 days, you take on a much larger charge of the universal forces, and it takes time for your body, your system to integrate them. So you instinctively are been digesting that meal.
That's what it was. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know that I would get the news about a month ago that the place where I've lived, a beautiful home and apartment in an 1890 house. Huge, beautiful, that I've lived there for 13 years, 10 years with a partner. Beautiful ground, gardens, and just great neighborhood. And I got the announcement that the owner had sold the house, wanted me out June 1st. Yeah, not out yet. I panicked. I mean, this is a huge chapter of my life, really 19 years in New Haven and building my life back together after being in rehab. Now, 20 years this fall. So rebuilding my life. So it's a huge chapter, lots of, just huge.
What another, this definitely looks like a curse, but I assure you it's a blessing, where it's going to force you to do something that you wouldn't have done on your own.
This is exactly it. I kept getting this image before coming up here. I used to take a workshop and with this nice guy, and so I was on his email list, and he'd have these workshops of jumping out of a plane, and he's like, "Come on, everybody, it's really great." And it's like, there's no way I'm going to jump out of a plane.
Why would you jump out of a plane?
And he said, once you do it, and after the first time, it's just incredible. Now he's addicted to it, and he takes all these workshops out for people jumping out of planes, parachute. I mean, and how exhilarating it is. So
awakening, jumping out of the airplane's the next best thing, at least for the first 5 seconds.
So the universe is pushing me out of that plane. So I am meeting up with the inevitable. Okay. And God or the universe is saying, you can either be totally full of fear, which I was the first week, what do I do? Do I look for, part of my income, a lot of my income was because I run an Airbnb out of this very large 2-bedroom apartment, very successfully. Mm-hmm. Big chunk of my income. So that's gone. Painting studio packed up and in storage right now. That's on hold. And so my finances, I have the opposite problem. My relationship with money it's a tough one.
But you're independent. You were independent through your gigs in your life up to this point. Okay. And you have other gigs going on besides this?
A couple, but the biggie was the Airbnb. So that's, so a lot of fear. Good. So the universe is saying you can either enjoy this and have fun.
Yeah, sure. The fear can be enjoyment if it's possibility, because then it's something like excitement. Fear is simply an awakening of the body that brings us out of our slumber into existence at a new vibrational level. So fear is simply a shift in the energy. So is excitement. It's our interpretation that determines how we evaluate that. So, yeah, it's actually an exciting possibility on the other hand.
Yeah, you said at one point, anything that would keep you distracted. Mm-hmm. And that's what the Airbnb, taking care of a house, guests, it's a big job, along with all the other ones. So anything that would keep me distracted. So I'm about to.
So that's good. So when are you going to be out?
I have to be out right now, June 30th, 2 weeks. I'm having a tag sale Saturday. So it's just this mad trying to, as you said, it's throwing weight off the boat so that I can float.
Yeah, very good.
But I've been looking, I have no idea where, I've never in my life not known where I'm moving to. But the solution has not appeared. It's a gut thing, wherever you move, whether it's a house or another country, you feel, it's like, okay, this is right. This is a good feeling. I can operate here, and I haven't. So it's perplexing.
Right. So it's an important transition.
It's a big unknown.
So are you doing the Salt weekend tomorrow?
No, I'm not. I'm just not able to because of this urgency of everything that's going on. I know.
It would help you. Try to make space for it and try to come. Because the
next thing, 3 of my gigs are Saturday and Sunday, and the tag sale on top of that is Saturday.
I got it. Yeah. So it's not. All right. Well, then the idea here is you have the right to the action and not the fruit thereof. I would, at a practical level, make a interim arrangement where stuff is in storage and you could stay with somebody or something